The test was not whether you could survive another disappointment. You already proved that. The test was whether disappointment could still turn you back into someone you had outgrown. Something happened recently that touched the exact place that used to control you. Maybe someone went silent. Maybe a person you released appeared again. Maybe you were ignored, disrespected, or tempted to explain yourself again. You felt the old reaction rise. Your chest tightened. Your mind started building the familiar argument. But this time, you did not obey it. You did not send the message. You did not chase the answer. You did not reopen the door because loneliness made the hallway feel cold. You stayed with the discomfort, and you chose something different. Chosen one, that is what this moment is really about. The title says, God dropped everything in heaven when he saw what you did. Take that as an image of weight, not a literal claim about heaven stopping. What mattered was the quiet evidence that an old pattern no longer had the same authority over you. Transformation does not always arrive with visible proof. Sometimes it arrives as the reaction that never happened. Anxiety spoke, but you did not chase. Rejection hurt, but you did not beg. Fear asked you to control the outcome, but you let the outcome breathe. The situation looked familiar, yet the person answering it was becoming new. And this is where many people miss their own progress. They expect healing to feel powerful every second. They expect peace to erase pain. But growth often looks quieter than that, because freedom is not always what you feel. It is what no longer controls what you do. Think about the moment you almost went backward. Maybe your hand reached for the phone. Maybe your mind rehearsed the explanation. Maybe part of you wanted to prove your value to someone committed to misunderstanding you. Then something inside you stopped the cycle before it completed itself. That pause matters. You may still feel hurt. You may still miss what you released. You may still wonder whether you made the right choice. None of that cancels the fact that you responded differently. Pain can remain while authority changes hands. The wound can speak while wisdom makes the final decision. Before this message is over, I want to show you why that quiet decision matters. Why you can cross an inner threshold and still feel mentally foggy afterward, and how to close the gap between knowing who you are becoming and moving from that identity. Because there is a gap almost nobody explains. You can know the truth and still struggle to act on it. You can have conviction while attention remains scattered. You can stop feeding an old emotional pattern while your mind keeps expecting the old ending. That does not mean your breakthrough was fake. It means your breakthrough has entered its next stage. So if this describes you, say it plainly. I chose differently. Not because every feeling disappeared, but because the feeling did not get the final vote. And now there is one question that will guide everything that follows. If the old reaction no longer answered for you, then who did? Stay with that question. The answer is bigger than the action itself. It will explain why something that looked small outside carried much weight inside. And it will show you why the person you are becoming is visible in decisions nobody else saw. Chosen one. The answer begins with something simple. God was not measuring how impressive you looked. He was not waiting for perfect performance. He was not asking whether you could feel nothing. What mattered was the decision underneath the action, because that decision revealed what no public moment could reveal. Maybe you still cried afterward. Maybe your hands shook. Maybe your mind returned to the same memory. That does not erase what happened. Strength is not the absence of emotion. Strength appears when emotion stops being the only voice with authority. You felt the pull, and you still chose peace. There are signs this shift has begun. You no longer need to win every argument. You no longer chase closure from people who create confusion. You can miss someone without returning to what hurt you. You can feel fear without treating fear like instruction. Slowly, being at peace matters more than being understood. These changes look ordinary from the outside. That is why people overlook them. But there is a name for this kind of moment. I call it The unseen decision. It is a choice too small to impress the world, but large enough to prove an old identity is losing authority. Think about Joseph. His formation began long before public responsibility arrived. The hidden years shaped how he would carry what came later. Your life does not need to copy his story. The useful pattern is simpler. Private choices build capacity before public moments reveal it. So look again at what you just did. Maybe nobody congratulated you. Maybe the other person never knew you, chose restraint. Yet you know the old version of you would have reacted another way. That contrast is evidence you can examine. And if you are still here, you probably know the exact decision I mean. You could have forced an answer. You could have reopened an old door. Instead, you refused to betray what you had learned. That is why the moment carried weight. Not because one decision made you perfect, not because God now owes you a reward. It mattered because your response revealed a direction. The old pattern called, and for once, it did not receive automatic obedience. But now a harder question appears. If you truly changed, why can the outside still look almost the same? Why can the same person remain silent? Why can the same pressure remain? Why can loneliness return, even after you made the right decision? Many chosen ones get discouraged here. They assume an unchanged circumstance means an unchanged self. They mistake delay in the outer world for failure in the inner world. But those are not the same thing, and confusing them can pull you back into the pattern you interrupted. Sometimes the situation repeats before your identity fully stabilizes. The trigger looks familiar. The feeling looks familiar. But the response begins to change. When that happens, the old story is no longer running without resistance. So do not measure this season only by what has moved around you. Measure what has stopped moving you. That difference explains why the circumstance can look old while your response becomes new. And once you see that, repetition no longer has to mean you are back where you started. Chosen one, this is where the outer world can confuse you. You changed your response, but the circumstance did not immediately change with it. The same silence can remain. The same pressure can remain. And if you are not careful, you can mistake repetition for proof that nothing happened. But look closer. The situation may be repeating, while you are not. A familiar trigger does not automatically mean you returned to a familiar identity. Sometimes growth becomes visible when the same pressure can no longer produce the same automatic response. Here is the symptom. You set a boundary, but you still think about the person. You choose faith, but anxiety still visits. You stop chasing, but the silence still hurts. Then your mind offers the old explanation. Maybe I am not healed. Maybe I made the wrong choice. Maybe I am back at the beginning. Pain is loud, but it is not always a reliable measure of progress. You can feel the old emotion without surrendering to the old behavior. Familiar pain does not mean the old pattern still owns you. This is the hidden mechanism. External circumstances can repeat faster than identity patterns disappear. A trigger can return before a new response feels natural. The outside can look familiar while your choices begin telling a different story. So stop asking only, why is this happening again? Ask a better question. Who is responding this time? That changes the frame. It moves your attention from the event toward the person meeting it. Use 3 questions when the old pattern returns. First, what am I actually feeling? Name it without making it a prophecy. Fear is fear. Loneliness is loneliness. Anger is anger. An emotion can be real without becoming an instruction. Second, what does the old pattern want me to do? Maybe it wants you to send the message. Maybe it wants you to check again. Maybe it wants you to prove yourself or abandon a boundary just to end the discomfort. Third, what would alignment choose instead? Not what creates instant relief. What choice protects the lesson you already learned? Sometimes alignment means silence. Sometimes it means a clear conversation. The action can change, but the principle remains. Picture this. Your phone lights up. You see the name. Your body reacts before your thoughts catch up. For a second, the old story opens its mouth. But you do not move immediately. You breathe. You let the first wave pass. You choose after the wave, not inside it. That is what maturity can look like. It is the growing ability to separate what you feel from what you decide. That space may last only a few seconds at first, but those seconds can change the direction of an entire pattern. If this is the shift you recognize, say it plainly. The pattern ends here. You are declaring that the old response no longer receives automatic access to your next move. Take one slow breath. Let your shoulders drop. You do not need to solve the entire season in one moment. You only need to notice that the cycle no longer completes itself as easily as before. That is evidence. And now, the first loop closes. The situation may repeat because repetition creates comparison. You finally see the same trigger meet a different response, but that opens a deeper problem. What happens when you know the right response and still cannot seem to move? Why can you understand the lesson and still become foggy when it is time to act? Why can clarity appear in prayer, then disappear the next morning? That question leads to the next layer, because spiritual understanding and practical execution are not always the same thing. Chosen one, now we reach the part that confuses many sincere people. You can know what is right and still struggle to move. You can feel spiritually clear and mentally tired at the same time. Those two experiences can exist together, and when you do not understand that, you may start blaming your faith for a problem that has another layer. Maybe you know you need to leave something behind, but you keep delaying the final step. Maybe you know which project matters, yet your mind becomes foggy when you sit down to begin. You may pray and feel clear at night, then wake up scattered the next morning. You may receive a strong idea, then lose momentum before you can build anything from it. That does not automatically mean you are lazy. It does not mean you are weak. And it does not mean you failed spiritually. Faith should not become another weapon you use against yourself. There is a difference between knowing and organizing what you know. You can recognize the right direction while your attention is still pulled in 5 directions at once. You can believe something deeply while your daily habits keep feeding confusion. That is why clarity can feel real in one moment and strangely distant in the next. Think about how sharp you may have felt when you were younger. You could become absorbed in one thing for hours. You asked questions without overthinking how you looked. You imagined freely. You learned through curiosity, and you did not always need 10 signs before trying something new. Life adds pressure. Responsibility adds noise. Repetition builds habits. Over time, the mind can become so used to interruption that focus begins to feel unfamiliar. Then you call yourself inconsistent, when part of the problem may be that your inner receiver is crowded. There is a receiver involved in every message. You can hear guidance, but something still has to organize attention around it. You can recognize an opportunity, but something still has to hold the idea long enough to act. You can sense what matters, but a scattered mind can turn a clear signal into another unfinished intention. This is not about becoming superhuman, it is about becoming available to your own clarity. And if you have been blaming yourself for being mentally exhausted, let this be the moment you stop turning fatigue into a verdict on your character. If this gave you language for something you have felt, press like for the person who has been trying to carry everything with a tired mind. Not as a ritual, not as a transaction, just as a quiet marker that you are ready to understand the problem differently. Because the next question matters. What if part of the fog you have been calling spiritual weakness has a different address? What if there is a reason you can know the truth and still struggle to convert that knowing into attention, decision, and movement? That is where something unexpected enters this message. A line of research from laboratories begins to intersect with a question many spiritually sensitive people have asked for years. And the answer is not about trying harder. It is about understanding the condition of the receiver itself. Earlier, I asked you to notice the difference between the message and the receiver. Now hold that distinction carefully. Over the past several decades, researchers have studied how different regions of the human brain cooperate during attention, creativity, decision-making, and complex thought. That research does not replace faith, but it can give us another language for why clarity sometimes feels available and sometimes feels difficult to use. There are approaches designed to support coordination across the brain rather than asking you to force concentration through willpower alone. One of those approaches was developed around the idea of neural synchronization, drawing inspiration from research connected to Nobel Prize-winning work on how the two hemispheres function. I will return to the specific tool later. For now, the important point is much simpler. What if part of what you have been calling a spiritual failure is actually a receiving problem you were never taught to name? I call this the receiver gap. It is the distance between what you have recognized spiritually and your ability to organize attention, decisions, and action around that recognition. You can know what matters and still become distracted. You can sense the next step and still hesitate. The receiver gap does not mean your faith is broken. It does not mean God is withholding something because your mind is imperfect. And it does not mean any product can manufacture spiritual truth for you. A tool may support clarity, but it cannot create obedience, purpose, wisdom, or relationship with God. Think of the last week. How many times did you know what needed to happen, then spend an hour doing everything except that thing? How many times did a clear idea appear, only to become buried under notifications, worries, and second-guessing? They show where the bridge between insight and action needs support. So say this without shame: I am ready to receive. Not receive as in demanding an outcome from heaven. Receive as in becoming more available to what you already know matters. Receive as in protecting attention long enough to recognize the next honest step. Now, picture a simple morning. You wake up without immediately feeding the loudest fear. One priority becomes visible. You finish what needs to be finished before searching for another sign. You enter a difficult conversation without rehearsing 20 imaginary endings. Nothing magical falls into your hands, but your response quality changes. That change can affect everything around it. A clearer decision can prevent a week of delay. A calmer conversation can protect a relationship. Focus can help you recognize an opportunity you would have ignored while scattered. Clarity does not guarantee a certain outcome, but it changes how you meet the outcomes that arrive. Let that settle for a moment. You do not have to force yourself into a new identity tonight. You are learning how to reduce the distance between the truth you recognize and the life you actually live. And before any solution becomes useful, we need to identify exactly where the receiver gets disrupted. Because if you misunderstand the problem, you will keep prescribing more effort to a system already overloaded. The next layer is not another command to believe harder. It is a practical explanation for why insight can be genuine while execution still breaks down. Chosen one. This is where the second breakthrough begins. You may have spent months collecting insight. You prayed, you journaled, you listened carefully, you understood the pattern. Yet, when it was time to move, your mind became foggy, tired, distracted, or strangely resistant. The common explanation is brutal. You tell yourself you need more discipline. You think a truly aligned person would act immediately. But hesitation can come from overload, habitual distraction, and a mind trained to split attention across too many demands. That matters because clarity and execution are partners. They are not the same thing. You can receive a real insight without having the mental conditions to carry it into action consistently. Picture what happens after a strong moment of clarity. You know the conversation you need to have. You know the task you need to finish. Then the phone lights up. A small fear asks for one more round of analysis. 10 minutes later, the original decision has been buried under noise. This is not an excuse to avoid responsibility. It is a more accurate place to begin. If your attention is fragmented, the answer is not always more shame. Sometimes the first step is reducing the number of competing signals long enough to let one clear decision become behavior. Use what I call the 90-second alignment check. First, name the decision in one sentence. Do not explain it for 5 minutes. Name it. Second, remove one distraction that can steal the next minute. Third, ask what single action would prove alignment right now. Then do that action before searching for another sign. If the decision is to send one honest email, write the first line. If the decision is to leave the room, stand up. If the decision is to protect a boundary, stop composing the explanation that keeps reopening it. Clarity becomes action when it is given a specific address. Earlier, I asked whether part of the fog could have an address other than faith. We can finally return to that question. I told you there was research connected to how the brain coordinates different functions, and I told you there was a practical approach I would explain later. But there is still one question left. Why can a person understand the pattern, recognize the old identity, even know the next right action, and still feel as though the mind itself refuses to cooperate? Insight is real. Faith may be real. Yet, neither automatically organizes attention. That missing piece is where the next part begins. Here is the why. You have been trying to solve every delay as if it were a spiritual defect. That interpretation adds pressure to a system that may already be overloaded. Here is the what. The old response can lose authority while your mind still needs support to operate with greater consistency and clarity. And here is the who. You are becoming someone who does more than receive insight. You are learning to use clarity responsibly. You are learning to make one aligned decision before asking for 10 more confirmations. You are learning to let understanding become movement. This does not mean every struggle has a neurological cause. It does not mean one tool explains your entire life. It means the picture can be wider. Your faith may be sincere, while your attention still needs care. You are no longer the person who reacts to everything. The question now is whether your mind is ready to support the person you have become. And that is why we can finally open the research I promised to return to. Not as a replacement for God, not as a shortcut to destiny, as one possible way to support the receiver that must carry the choices your spirit already knows how to make. Earlier, I promised to return to the research behind the receiver. This is that moment. In 1981, Dr. Roger Sperry received the Nobel Prize for work that helped reveal how the two hemispheres of the brain can specialize in different functions. That history matters, but it does not prove that any commercial product works. It gives us a scientific starting point for understanding coordination across the brain. The product materials I reviewed build from that idea of coordination. They describe whole brain activation as a state in which both sides work together more effectively during attention, creativity, and decision-making. They also describe a targeted auditory approach designed to support neural synchronization. That is the bridge from the research story to the tool itself. Before I name it, listen to 2 reported experiences from the product materials. A woman from California described living with persistent mental fog and the feeling that life was happening to her. She had tried several personal practices and still felt disconnected. After using the audio consistently, she reported feeling clearer, calmer, and more emotionally present in her relationship. A man from Texas described a different problem. He carried responsibility for work and family, but said his thinking had become dull and scattered. According to his account, consistent use was followed by a stronger sense of mental clarity and better focus. These are individual reports, not guarantees. Your experience may be different. The tool is called the Genius Switch. According to the seller, it is an 8-minute, targeted auditory sequence designed around what they call neural sync technology. You listen with headphones, close your eyes, and allow the sequence to play. There is no required mantra. There is no complicated ritual. The physical routine is simple. The seller positions the sequence as different from generic relaxation audio because the focus is not simply mood. Their stated goal is supporting coordination between the hemispheres through a specific auditory design. Again, that is the product claim, not a promise that every listener will experience the same result. This is not for everyone. It is for the chosen one who is ready to stop treating every moment of mental fog as a moral failure. It is for the person who has done the inner work, recognized the old pattern, and now wants to support the mind that must carry the next decision. The current product materials list the standard price as $49, with an offer of $39 on the page described to me. Because offers can change, check the page itself before making any decision. The package also lists lifetime digital access and 4 additional resources. Those resources include a guided visualization, a smart grocery shopping guide, a classic manifestation book, included as a bonus, and a printable 5 Habits infographic. The seller also states that the purchase is covered by a money-back guarantee under the terms shown on the official page. Do not hear this as pressure. Clarity should never be turned into panic. If this tool fits what you have been looking for, use the clarity of this moment to examine it instead of postponing the decision without looking. If it does not fit, continue with the deeper work we are doing here. One more thing matters. The seller identifies the direct page as the source for the exact product and current offer. So, if your spirit resonates with what has been described, the link in the description and the pinned comment will take you to the page where you can read the details for yourself. Read everything. Look at the terms. Decide carefully. A tool does not replace God. A tool does not replace obedience. It does not choose your purpose, repair every problem, or make decisions for you. At most, it can support the clarity with which you meet the work already in front of you. And now we return to something larger than the product. What happens when the old pattern has lost authority, but your outer life has not yet changed shape? That is where the deepest meaning of what you did finally becomes visible. Chosen one. This is the point where many people become afraid of their own progress. They have one difficult day, feel the old emotion, and immediately assume everything they learned has disappeared. But a return of feeling is not automatically a return of identity. One bad hour does not erase a new pattern. You can feel anger again. You can feel lonely again. You can feel the urge to check, chase, explain, or control. The difference is what happens next. The old self treated the feeling like an order. The restored self recognizes the feeling, gives it space, and chooses after the first wave has passed. Remember this rule. Never make a permanent decision from a temporary nervous system spike. When the body is flooded, delay the irreversible choice. Breathe, walk, pray. Write the thought down. Let the intensity fall before you decide what the moment actually requires. Now we reach the heaviest breakthrough in this message. You may have been waiting for God to prove your breakthrough by changing the circumstance. You expected the relationship to transform, the money to appear, the opportunity to open, or the answer to arrive. You kept looking outside for evidence that something inside had become real. But what if the first breakthrough was not the disappearance of the circumstance? What if it was the disappearance of its authority over you? The person could remain silent, but silence no longer made you beg. The door could remain closed, but the closed door no longer convinced you that you were worthless. The delay could remain, but delay no longer forced you into panic. The circumstance stayed familiar, while its power to dictate your identity began to collapse. That is what the image in the title points toward. God dropping everything in heaven is not a literal claim that heaven stopped functioning. It is a picture of the weight carried by a private moment of identity evidence. Same wound, different response. Same pressure, different decision. If that moment could speak, perhaps the message would sound this simple. You finally chose what I was teaching you. Not perfection, not emotional numbness, not a guarantee that every external outcome will now go your way. The victory is that the old cycle can knock without automatically being given the key. And now I can name you more precisely. You are not only someone who survived the pattern, you are becoming the restored pattern breaker, a person who no longer needs the outside world to change first before choosing alignment inside. So, if this is yours, mark it with one sentence. The old cycle lost me. Not because you will never feel the old pull again. It lost you because the pull no longer owns the final decision. The resource described earlier remains in the description for anyone who wants to examine that path. Read it carefully. Decide whether it belongs in your own practice. Then return to the deeper point, because no tool can make this declaration for you. Before we close, there is one final step. Not a prediction about what is coming, not a promise about what God must send next. It is a declaration about who will meet whatever comes next. And that declaration is where the primary question from the beginning finally closes. Chosen one, there is one final concept to carry with you. I call it the return point. It is not about becoming superhuman. It is the moment you return to deliberate response, clear attention, and trust in what you have learned. Bring one specific trigger back to mind, the message you almost sent, the door you almost reopened, the moment you nearly abandoned your boundary because discomfort felt unbearable. See that version of yourself clearly. Now imagine two versions of you beside that memory. One reacts immediately. That version checks, chases, explains, proves, and tries to control the ending. The other version feels the same first wave, but pauses long enough to choose. Do not hate the old version. That part of you was trying to protect you with the tools it knew. It learned that chasing might prevent abandonment. It learned that explaining might create safety. Thank it. Then let it know it no longer has to drive. Place one hand over your chest if that feels comfortable. Take a slow breath. Feel the rise and fall beneath your hand. Then say this quietly inside. Feeling is information. Alignment chooses the action. You do not have to erase fear. You do not have to erase longing. You do not have to become emotionless before you can become free. Freedom begins when an emotion can visit without receiving ownership of your next move. So release the need to prove. Release the chasing. Release the compulsive checking. Release the urge to force what cannot be forced. Release the habit of reopening dead doors because silence feels uncomfortable. Release the belief that every delay means rejection. And now, make the declaration. I am not the reaction I inherited. I am not the fear that visits me. I am not the door I had to close. I do not need chaos to know I am alive. I do not need rejection to prove my worth. I do not need another sign before I honor what I already know. I am the one who pauses. I am the one who discerns. I am the one who chooses differently. I am the one who carries clarity responsibly. I am the restored pattern breaker. I am ready to meet what comes next as who I have become. Remember the question from the beginning. If the old reaction no longer answered for you, then who did? The answer is you. Not the frightened version trained by the old cycle. The version of you that no longer needs the pattern to disappear before becoming free from its control. That is what your quiet decision revealed. The moment was small enough for the world to miss, but clear enough for you to recognize. You did not need applause, you needed evidence. The evidence was the response that never happened. If this declaration belongs to you, write one sentence. I choose differently. Let it mark identity, not superstition. No comment can purchase a blessing. No phrase can force an outcome. It simply names the choice you are already practicing. May you carry peace without becoming passive. May you carry clarity without becoming controlling. May you remain open without abandoning discernment. May the next door meet a person who no longer betrays themselves to stay inside it. Amen. Share this with someone, leaving an old cycle, questioning a boundary, or thinking pain means healing failed. Sometimes people need language for progress they already made.